The moment Chloe Anderson felt the cold ceramic bowl touch the back of her skull, she knew Tyler Chun had finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The thick acrylic paint poured over her head in slow motion, crimson red cascading down her face and soaking into her carefully chosen white sweater. The art classroom erupted in gasps and nervous laughter as paint splattered across the floor. But what happened in the next 15 seconds would transform a moment of humiliation into a viral sensation that changed everything about power dynamics at Westfield Academy. Tyler thought he was dealing with just another quiet transfer student who would crumble under pressure. He had no idea that beneath Chloe's gentle exterior lay 8 years of rigorous martial arts training and a philosophy about justice that her sensei had drilled into her since childhood. What unfolded next didn't just end Tyler's reign of terror. It sparked a movement that inspired students across the country to finally stand up for themselves. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chloe Anderson had mastered the art of calculated invisibility. During her first month at Westfield Academy, a skill that required far more strategy than most people realized. At 17, she possessed an understated elegance that came from years of disciplined training. Though none of her new classmates knew about the black belt certificate hanging in her bedroom back home in Oregon. Her auburn hair was typically braided in a practical style that kept it away from her face during what she privately called observation periods, the careful study of social dynamics that helped her navigate each new environment her family encountered. The Anderson family's relocation to Millbrook, Connecticut had been swift and unexpected. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Anderson, had accepted a position as head of pediatric surgery at Hartford Medical Center, an opportunity that represented the pinnacle of her 15-year career, but required leaving behind everything familiar. Chloe's father, Mark Anderson, had taken early retirement from his position as a high school principal in Portland to support the family transition and explore consulting opportunities in educational administration. Neither parent fully grasped how dramatically their decision would impact their daughter's carefully constructed sense of identity and belonging. Westfield Academy represented everything Chloe's previous school hadn't been. Where Lincoln High in Portland had been sprawling and diverse with over 2,800 students from every conceivable background, Westfield felt intimate and insular with its 900 students who seemed to have known each other since elementary school. The brick buildings were arranged around a central courtyard that students used for outdoor lunches when Connecticut weather permitted, creating a campus that felt more like a small college than a typical public high school. Ancient oak trees lined the walkways between buildings, their massive trunks bearing decades of carved initials and declarations of teenage love that spoke to generations of students who had claimed this place as their own. The hallways buzzed with the particular energy of established social ecosystems, where every student occupied a clearly defined role in an unspoken hierarchy that newcomers violated at their own risk. Chloe had observed these dynamics during her first weeks with the analytical precision her sensei, Master Williams, had taught her to apply when assessing potential threats or allies. She noted how conversations shifted when certain students approached, how seating arrangements in the cafeteria followed invisible territorial boundaries, and how teachers' attention seemed to gravitate toward particular students who wielded influence that extended beyond academic performance. Her daily schedule had been carefully constructed to minimize social friction while maximizing her ability to excel academically. First period advanced placement biology provided intellectual challenge without requiring extensive group interaction, taught by Mrs. Patterson, a methodical woman in her 50s who appreciated students who came prepared and asked thoughtful questions. Second period honors English literature was led by Mr. Rodriguez, an enthusiastic teacher who encouraged creative analysis, but didn't force participation from students who preferred to contribute through written assignments rather than class. Discussions. Third period represented Chloe's greatest challenge and opportunity. Advanced studio art with Ms. Cooper, a vibrant woman in her 30s who had transformed the art wing into a creative sanctuary that attracted students from across the social spectrum. The studio occupied the entire third floor of the arts building, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light and offered views of the surrounding Connecticut countryside. Professional-grade equipment lined the walls: pottery wheels, printing presses, digital design stations, and painting easels that could accommodate everything from watercolor studies to large-scale oil paintings. Ms. Cooper had earned her Master of Fine Arts from Yale and brought both technical expertise and genuine passion to her instruction. She treated her students as emerging artists rather than mere pupils, encouraging experimental techniques and personal expression while maintaining rigorous standards for craftsmanship and conceptual development. The advanced studio art class was deliberately small, limited to 15 students who had demonstrated both artistic ability and serious commitment to developing their skills. Chloe had gravitated toward mixed media sculptures that incorporated elements from her martial arts training pieces that explored themes of balance, discipline, and hidden strength through carefully arranged materials that appeared delicate but possessed surprising structural integrity. Her latest project involved creating a series of small figures cast in bronze and arranged in poses that suggested both dance and combat, reflecting her understanding that the most effective martial arts techniques often resembled graceful movement rather than violent action. The sculpture studio became Chloe's refuge during lunch periods and after school hours when the building grew quiet, and she could work without the social pressures that made other spaces feel like minefields. Miss Cooper had given her permission to use the advanced metalworking equipment after observing her intuitive understanding of how different materials could be combined to create unexpected effects. These solitary work sessions provided the meditative focus that Chloe had learned to associate with her martial arts practice, opportunities to center herself and maintain connection to the disciplined mindset that Master Williams had spent years helping her develop. Master Williams operated a traditional dojo in Portland's Hawthorne district, a converted warehouse space that emphasized function over aesthetics with wooden floors, worn smooth by decades of practice, and walls lined with mirrors that reflected technique rather than vanity. He had immigrated from South Korea in the 1980s, bringing with him a martial arts philosophy that emphasized mental discipline and moral development alongside physical skills. His instruction went far beyond teaching fighting techniques to encompass lessons about character, responsibility, and the ethical use of power that distinguished true martial artists from mere fighters. Under Master Williams' guidance, Chloe had progressed through the ranks with methodical dedication, earning her black belt at age 15 through a combination of technical mastery and demonstrated understanding of martial arts philosophy. Her training sessions began each day at 5:30 in the morning, before school, with meditation and forms practice that prepared both her body and mind for whatever challenges the day might bring. Master Williams emphasized that the strongest martial artists were those who never needed to demonstrate their abilities publicly, that true power came from the confidence to avoid conflicts whenever possible, and the wisdom to end them quickly when avoidance failed. The philosophical aspects of her training proved as important as the physical techniques. Master Williams taught Chloe to read body language and facial expressions with scientific precision, to recognize the warning signs that preceded aggressive behavior, and to remain centered regardless of external pressures or provocations. He explained that martial arts was fundamentally about understanding human nature, both your own and that of potential opponents, and using that understanding to maintain harmony while being prepared to restore it when others chose violence. Their training sessions concluded with discussions about real-world applications of martial arts principles, conversations that prepared Chloe to navigate complex social situations with the same strategic thinking she applied to sparring matches. Master Williams emphasized that the goal was never to seek confrontation, but to be so thoroughly prepared for it that others would instinctively recognize attempting to harm you was a mistake. They couldn't afford to make the move to Connecticut. Meant leaving behind 8 years of daily training in the steady guidance of a mentor who understood both her capabilities and her character. Master Williams had helped Chloe research martial arts schools in the Hartford area, but none offered the combination of traditional instruction and philosophical depth that had shaped her development. The closest equivalent was over an hour away, making regular attendance impossible with her parents' demanding work schedules and the academic requirements of her new school. Chloe had adapted by creating a makeshift training space in the Anderson family's new home, a colonial house, on 2 acres that provided enough privacy for outdoor practice when weather permitted. Her parents had been supportive, but didn't fully understand the extent to which martial arts had become central to her identity and daily routine. They saw it as an excellent form of exercise and self-defense training rather than recognizing it as a comprehensive philosophy that influenced how she approached every aspect of life. Her bedroom reflected this dual nature. Typical teenage elements like books and art supplies, combined with meditation cushions, practice weapons, and photographs from competitions and belt testing ceremonies. A small shrine in one corner held gifts from Master Williams, a hand-carved wooden Buddha, calligraphy scrolls with inspirational quotes about perseverance and inner strength, and incense that she burned during evening meditation sessions that helped her process the day's experiences and maintain emotional. Academic achievement was highly valued, but seemed secondary to social positioning and family connections in determining a student's status within the school ecosystem. Chloe noticed that certain students received preferential treatment from teachers and administrators not because of their academic performance, but because of their parents' influence in the community. School board members, major donors, and prominent local business owners wielded power that extended into classrooms and influenced everything from grade appeals to disciplinary decisions. The arts program at Westfield enjoyed unusual support and funding compared to most public schools, largely due to alumni donations and community partnerships that provided professional-grade equipment and guest instruction from working artists. This support created opportunities for serious artistic development, but also intensified competition among students who viewed admission to prestigious art schools as their pathway to future success. Chloe's sculpture work had attracted attention from both Ms. Cooper and several advanced students who recognized the sophistication of her techniques and conceptual approach. Her pieces demonstrated technical skills that typically required years of instruction, combined with artistic vision that suggested natural talent and serious commitment to developing her craft. The recognition was gratifying but also potentially dangerous in an environment where standing out could make someone a target for students who felt threatened by newcomers who challenged established hierarchies. Her friendship with Marcus Thompson had developed organically during shared studio time when they discovered mutual interests in experimental art techniques and philosophical discussions about the role of art in social change. Marcus was a senior who served as editor of the school newspaper and possessed an innate sense of justice that reminded Chloe of Master Williams' teachings about using strength to protect others rather than advance personal interests. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus came from one of the few African-American families in Millbrook, a factor that had taught him to navigate social situations with careful attention to dynamics that other students could ignore. His father was a chemistry professor at Trinity College, while his mother worked as a civil rights attorney, backgrounds that had instilled in Marcus both intellectual curiosity and awareness of systemic inequalities that shaped opportunities and outcomes in ways that weren't always visible to those who benefited from them. Through Marcus, Chloe learned about Westfield's unwritten rules and potential social pitfalls, that could transform a minor social misstep into lasting reputation damage. He explained how certain students wielded influence that extended beyond typical teenage social dynamics into realms that could affect academic opportunities, college recommendations, and even family relationships within the tight-knit community. Advanced Studio Art class represented a unique social space where traditional hierarchies were somewhat suspended in favor of artistic merit and creative collaboration. Students from different social circles worked together on projects that required cooperation rather than competition, creating temporary alliances that sometimes developed into genuine friendships that transcended typical boundary lines. Chloe had begun to find her rhythm within this environment, developing confidence in her artistic abilities while maintaining the low profile that kept her safe from the kinds of social conflicts that could derail her academic goals. Her sculpture work was progressing beautifully, her grades remained strong across all subjects, and she had established a supportive friendship with Marcus that provided both social connection and practical guidance about navigating Westfield's complex social terrain. The stability of this careful balance was about to be shattered by forces she hadn't anticipated and couldn't control through strategy or discipline alone. Tyler Chun understood influence in ways that most 17-year-olds never would, primarily because he'd been wielding it since middle school when other students first realized that crossing him meant facing consequences that extended far beyond typical teenage retaliation. Unlike the stereotypical bullies who relied on physical intimidation or crude harassment, Tyler had developed a sophisticated system of social control that operated through reputation management, strategic alliance building, and psychological manipulation disguised as leadership. At 6 feet 2 inches with the kind of athletic build that came from year-round lacrosse training and private gym sessions, Tyler possessed natural physical presence that he'd learned to weaponize through calculated displays of dominance rather than outright aggression. His black hair was styled with expensive products that maintained perfect arrangement regardless of weather or activity, and his wardrobe consisted entirely of designer pieces that communicated wealth without appearing ostentatious to adults who might disapprove of obvious displays of privilege. Chun family had built their fortune through a combination of shrewd real estate investments and technology startups that had positioned them among Millbrook's most influential residents. Despite being relative newcomers to the community, Tyler's father, David Chun, owned 3 software companies that specialized in data analytics for financial institutions, while his mother, Linda Chun, served on the boards of multiple nonprofit organizations and had recently been elected to the Westfield Academy School Board. Their modern mansion on Millbrook's most exclusive street featured floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist architecture, and art collections that reflected both sophisticated taste and unlimited financial resources. Tyler's power at Westfield Academy operated through multiple, interconnected systems that he'd spent years constructing and refining. His position as student body president provided official authority that he used to control funding for clubs and activities, ensuring that students who opposed him found their projects mysteriously denied approval or assigned inadequate budgets. His role as captain of the varsity lacrosse team gave him influence over the athletic social hierarchy, while his membership in the National Honor Society and debate team provided academic credibility that teachers and administrators respected. More importantly, Tyler had cultivated relationships with key faculty members and staff who viewed him as exemplary student leadership material. His mother's position on the school board created additional layers of protection that made challenging him professionally risky for teachers who valued job security. Principal Harrison frequently consulted Tyler about student concerns and policy changes, treating him as a valuable liaison between administration and student body rather than recognizing his role in creating many of the problems he claimed to solve. Tyler's inner circle consisted of carefully selected individuals who served specific functions in his social ecosystem while remaining completely dependent on his approval for their own status and security. His closest ally was Jake Morrison, whose family owned the largest construction company in 3 counties, and whose family owned the largest construction company, in 3 counties, and whose father's easygoing personality masked ruthless ambition that made him willing to execute Tyler's more aggressive strategies. Jake served as Tyler's enforcer and social coordinator, organizing the parties and events that reinforced their group's dominance, while handling situations that required more direct confrontation than Tyler preferred to engage in personally. Second member of their triumvirate was Alex Rodriguez, a brilliant student whose academic achievements rivaled Tyler's but whose social insecurities made him vulnerable to manipulation and control. Alex's parents were both professors at Yale University, providing intellectual credibility and cultural sophistication that Tyler valued, but ensuring that Alex remained conscious of his subordinate position within their friendship. Alex handled research and information gathering for Tyler's various campaigns, using his analytical skills to identify targets, vulnerabilities, and develop strategies for exploiting them. Together, the 3 formed a power structure that dominated Westfield Academy through different but complementary approaches. Tyler provided strategic vision and overall direction, while maintaining plausible deniability for their more questionable activities. Jake offered charisma and social connections that made their exclusive events seem desirable rather than exclusionary. Alex contributed intelligence and planning that elevated their operations beyond typical teenage drama into sophisticated psychological warfare. Their methods had evolved considerably since middle school, when Tyler first realized that traditional bullying was ineffective and potentially dangerous in an environment where parents and administrators took anti-bullying policies seriously. Instead, he developed techniques that operated below the radar of adult supervision while maximizing psychological impact on their targets. Character assassination through carefully planted rumors proved more effective than physical confrontation, while social isolation created longer-lasting damage than any beating could achieve. Tyler's approach to controlling Westfield's social landscape involved identifying potential threats to his authority and neutralizing them before they could challenge the established order. New students received particularly close scrutiny during their first weeks, as Tyler understood that newcomers represented the greatest danger to existing power structures. Students who arrived with confidence, talent, or social skills that might disrupt established hierarchies required immediate assessment and potential intervention. The process typically began with what Tyler privately called reconnaissance missions, systematic gathering of information about new students' backgrounds, family circumstances, academic abilities, and social connections. Alex's research skills proved invaluable during this phase, as he could compile comprehensive profiles that revealed potential pressure points and strategic vulnerabilities. This intelligence allowed Tyler to craft approaches that appeared friendly while actually serving to establish dominance and control. For students who showed appropriate deference and willingness to accept subordinate positions, Tyler often extended limited acceptance that came with clear boundaries and expectations. These conditional friendships served multiple purposes. They demonstrated Tyler's supposed magnanimity while creating a network of students who felt obligated to support him in exchange for social protection. The arrangement worked because most students preferred limited acceptance to complete exclusion, even when they understood the manipulative nature of the relationship. Students who demonstrated independence or indifference to Tyler's authority faced escalating pressure designed to force them into compliance or drive them away from activities and spaces that Tyler considered his domain. The campaigns typically began with subtle social isolation conversations that stopped when the target approached, invitations that were mysteriously not extended, group projects where they found themselves excluded from planning sessions. If these initial tactics proved insufficient, Tyler would escalate to reputation damage through strategic rumor campaigns, that highlighted real or imagined character flaws. The beauty of Tyler's system lay in its sustainability and deniability. Unlike physical bullying that left evidence and witnesses, psychological manipulation was difficult to prove, and even harder for victims to explain to adults who didn't understand the subtle dynamics involved. Tyler had perfected the art of appearing helpful and concerned while actually undermining his targets, offering advice that seemed well-intentioned but was designed to isolate them further or make them appear unstable when they complained about treatment they couldn't definitively prove. Westfield Academy's faculty and administration remained largely oblivious to Tyler's activities because his campaigns operated through social dynamics that adults typically dismissed as normal teenage behavior. Teachers saw him as a model student who participated enthusiastically in class discussions, completed assignments with exceptional quality, and demonstrated leadership qualities that suggested a promising future. His academic achievements were genuine. Tyler understood that maintaining credibility required real accomplishment alongside his social maneuvering. Principal Harrison particularly valued Tyler's apparent ability to maintain peace and order among the student body, not realizing that Tyler was actually controlling potential conflicts by ensuring that students who might challenge him were either co-opted into his system or marginalized before they could gain influence. The reduction in disciplinary incidents during Tyler's tenure as student body president reinforced the administration's perception that he was providing positive leadership rather than suppressing opposition through sophisticated intimidation. Tyler's lacrosse team provided another platform for exercising control and demonstrating his ability to build loyalty through shared achievement and social benefits. As captain, he had successfully led the team to 2 consecutive state championships, while creating a culture that extended beyond athletics into academic and social spheres. Team members received privileged access to parties, study groups, and social opportunities that reinforced their allegiance while making rebellion costly in terms of lost benefits and social connections. The lacrosse program's success had elevated Tyler's status throughout the community, as parents and local supporters viewed him as embodying the kind of leadership and dedication they wanted their own children to emulate. This broader recognition provided additional protection and credibility that made challenging him even more difficult for students who might otherwise speak out about his methods. Tyler's residence served as headquarters for his social operations, with regular gatherings that combined genuine entertainment with strategic relationship building and information exchange. The Chun family's wealth allowed him to host events that other students couldn't afford to organize, creating dependency. Relationships where access to social opportunities required maintaining his approval. These parties served multiple functions. They reinforced status hierarchies, provided opportunities for intelligence gathering, and demonstrated Tyler's power to include or exclude students from experiences they desperately wanted to be part of. The sophistication of Tyler's approach meant that even students who recognized the manipulative elements often felt powerless to resist or expose them. Speaking out against Tyler required evidence that was difficult to gather and risked retaliation that could destroy academic and social opportunities that took years to build. Most students found it easier to accept the existing order rather than challenge a system that seemed designed to crush opposition while rewarding compliance. By the time Chloe Anderson arrived at Westfield Academy, Tyler had spent 3 years perfecting his methods and establishing dominance that seemed unshakable. His position as student body president was secure, his academic record was exemplary, and his social control appeared absolute. The lacrosse team's continued success provided ongoing validation of his leadership abilities, while his family's influence ensured that any challenges to his authority would face institutional resistance. Tyler had handled previous newcomers with practiced efficiency, quickly identifying their potential threat levels and implementing appropriate responses that maintained his dominance while appearing to offer reasonable opportunities for integration. His confidence in these methods was absolute. Based on years of successful application and the absence of any student who had successfully resisted or exposed his tactics, what Tyler couldn't anticipate was encountering someone whose training and background had prepared them for exactly the kind of psychological warfare he specialized in deploying. The collision between Chloe Anderson's disciplined independence and Tyler Chun's need for absolute control occurred on a Tuesday morning in early November when the Connecticut landscape had transformed into a palette of burnt oranges and deep reds that reminded Chloe painfully of the Oregon autumn she'd left behind. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps it was inevitable, given the fundamental incompatibility between someone trained to never submit to intimidation and someone whose entire identity depended on others' submission. Tyler had spent 2 weeks conducting his standard reconnaissance on the new girl, compiling information through Alex's research abilities and Jake's social connections. What he'd learned should have been encouraging from his perspective. Chloe Anderson was a transfer student with no established social network, no family connections to local power structures, and no obvious protective relationships that might complicate his usual methods. Her academic performance was strong, but not exceptional enough to attract protective attention from faculty, and her artistic interests suggested the kind of creative temperament that Tyler had successfully exploited in previous targets. Yet something about Chloe's behavioral patterns troubled Tyler in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Most new students at Westfield exhibited recognizable signs of anxiety, desperation for acceptance, or defensive aggression that provided clear entry points for his influence campaigns. Chloe displayed none of these vulnerabilities. She moved through the school's social landscape with a calm confidence that seemed impervious to the subtle pressure tactics that typically made newcomers eager for any offer of inclusion or protection. Alex had reported that Chloe's academic performance across all subjects was consistently excellent, but never attention-seeking. She participated thoughtfully in class discussions, without trying to dominate conversations, completed assignments with meticulous attention to detail, and demonstrated the kind of intellectual curiosity that teachers appreciated without making other students feel threatened by comparison. Her behavior suggested someone comfortable with academic achievement but uninterested in using it for social positioning, an attitude that Tyler found both puzzling and potentially threatening. More concerning was Ms. Cooper's obvious enthusiasm for Chloe's artistic work. The art teacher had begun staying late to provide individual instruction and had mentioned in faculty meetings that Chloe's mixed media sculptures demonstrated techniques and conceptual sophistication rarely seen at the high school level. This level of teacher attention represented the kind of institutional recognition that Tyler considered his exclusive domain, and he'd begun planning interventions before the situation could escalate further. Jake's social intelligence network had provided additional data that painted a picture of someone who seemed almost deliberately uninterested in the social dynamics that governed most students' daily experiences. Chloe ate lunch with Marcus Thompson, a safe choice that suggested good judgment about allies, but no particular ambition for broader social acceptance. She arrived at school precisely on time and left immediately after the final bell, avoiding the hallway socializing and parking lot gatherings where most relationship building occurred. Her weekend activities were mysterious, as she'd politely declined several casual invitations to parties and study groups, without offering alternative suggestions or expressing regret about missing out. The reconnaissance phase had revealed one potentially useful detail. Chloe's family had relocated from Oregon for her mother's medical career advancement, suggesting possible financial pressures or social insecurities that Tyler might exploit. However, the Anderson family's new home in one of Millbrook's better neighborhoods indicated that money wasn't a significant factor, eliminating one of Tyler's most reliable pressure points for controlling students from less affluent backgrounds. Tyler's initial approach had been carefully calibrated to appear welcoming while establishing the hierarchical relationship he required from all students within his sphere of influence. The opportunity presented itself during lunch period when Chloe was working alone in the art studio, taking advantage of Miss Cooper's absence to practice metalworking techniques on her latest sculpture. Tyler arrived with Jake and Alex in tow. Their timing coordinated to seem casual while ensuring that any conversation would have witnesses who could corroborate Tyler's version of events if necessary. "Chloe Anderson," Tyler announced as he entered the studio, his voice carrying the warm authority he'd perfected for situations requiring diplomatic manipulation. "I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. Tyler Chun, student body president. I know starting at a new school can be overwhelming, especially somewhere like Westfield where everyone's known each other forever." Chloe looked up from her work, a bronze figure caught mid-motion in what appeared to be both dance and combat, and acknowledged his presence with a polite nod that revealed nothing about her emotional state or receptiveness to conversation. Her hands remained steady as she continued filing delicate details into the metal surface, suggesting that Tyler's interruption hadn't disrupted her concentration or caused the nervousness he typically observed when approaching students for the first time. "Thank you," Chloe replied simply, her tone pleasant, but offering no invitation for extended conversation. "I appreciate the introduction." Tyler had expected this response to serve as an opening for the kind of extended dialogue that allowed him to establish rapport, demonstrate his knowledge of school culture, and position himself as a valuable resource for someone navigating Westfield's social complexities. Instead, Chloe's brief acknowledgement seemed to consider the interaction complete, leaving Tyler in the awkward position of either pressing forward uninvited or accepting dismissal from someone who should have been grateful for his attention. "I've heard great things about your artistic work," Tyler continued, moving closer to examine her sculpture while Jake and Alex positioned themselves near the studio's exit in a formation that might appear casual to observers but effectively controlled the room's dynamics. "Miss Cooper has been quite impressed with your techniques. That's pretty remarkable for someone who's only been here a few weeks." The comment was designed to sound complimentary while carrying subtle implications about the speed of Chloe's integration and recognition that might suggest inappropriate favoritism or unearned advancement. Tyler had found that new students were often sensitive about being perceived as receiving special treatment, making them eager to downplay their achievements or defer to more established students who might feel threatened by their success. Chloe paused in her work to look directly at Tyler, her dark eyes meeting him with the kind of steady attention that most people found unsettling when maintained for more than a few seconds. "Miss Cooper is an excellent teacher," she said evenly. "Her instruction has helped me develop techniques I'd been struggling with on my own." Again, her response acknowledged Tyler's comment without providing the emotional reaction or defensive explanation he'd anticipated. She wasn't minimizing her achievements to avoid appearing arrogant, nor was she expressing gratitude for his recognition of her abilities. Instead, she'd simply stated facts while redirecting credit to her teacher, a response that demonstrated both confidence and strategic thinking that Tyler found increasingly frustrating. Jake stepped forward with his characteristic easy smile, attempting to inject more warmth into the conversation while providing Tyler with an opportunity to regroup. "We should definitely include you in some of our study groups," Jake offered, his tone suggesting generous inclusion rather than calculated recruitment. "We've got a pretty solid crew of students who help each other out with challenging coursework. Academic excellence is really important here at Westfield, and we like to make sure everyone has support systems." The offer was classic Tyler strategy, presenting group membership as a beneficial opportunity while implying that academic success required social connections and collaborative support that isolated students couldn't achieve independently. Most newcomers responded with enthusiasm or at least polite interest, providing openings for further relationship building and obligation creation that Tyler could exploit later. Chloe considered Jake's invitation for several seconds. Her expression, thoughtful rather than eager or anxious. "That's kind of you to offer," she finally replied. "But I prefer studying independently. I find I concentrate better when I can work at my own pace without worrying about group dynamics or scheduling." Conflicts. The rejection was delivered so matter-of-factly that it took Tyler several moments to process what had actually occurred. In 3 years of strategic relationship building at Westfield Academy, no student had ever declined inclusion in his inner circle's activities with such casual indifference. The refusal wasn't defensive or apologetic, it was simply a statement of preference that treated his exclusive invitation as neither particularly valuable nor worth reconsidering. Alex attempted to salvage the situation by appealing to Chloe's artistic interests. "There's also a really active arts community here," he explained, his academic precision evident in how he framed the appeal. "Students who are serious about creative work often benefit from networking with others who share similar interests and ambitions. Westfield has strong connections to regional art schools and summer programs that can be really valuable for portfolio development and college applications." This approach typically proved effective with artistically inclined students who understood that success in creative fields often depended as much on social connections as individual talent. Tyler watched Chloe's face carefully, looking for signs that Alex's mention of practical benefits might override her apparent preference for independence. "I'm focused on developing my technical skills right now," Chloe responded, returning her attention to the sculpture in her hands. "But I appreciate you sharing that information." The dismissal was so complete and unambiguous that Tyler felt something shift in his chest, a combination of surprise, frustration, and something approaching genuine bewilderment. Students at Westfield Academy simply didn't interact with him this way. His position, influence, and carefully cultivated social capital guaranteed respectful attention and grateful acceptance of any opportunities he chose to offer. Chloe's behavior suggested either complete ignorance of social dynamics or deliberate disrespect that demanded immediate correction. "I think you might be misunderstanding how things work here," Tyler said, allowing a slight edge to enter his voice while maintaining the superficial friendliness that provided plausible deniability if the conversation were ever reported to faculty. Westfield is a community where students support each other and build relationships that last beyond graduation. Trying to go it alone can be pretty isolating and might limit opportunities that could really benefit your future. The warning was carefully constructed to sound like helpful advice while communicating that Chloe's independence was being interpreted as rejection of community values that Tyler personally embodied. Most students recognized this type of coded message and responded with appropriate gratitude for his guidance, often asking how they might better integrate into school culture under his mentorship. Chloe set down her metalworking tools and turned to face Tyler directly, her posture relaxed but somehow conveying complete attention that reminded him uncomfortably of how predators focused on potential threats. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm confidence that had characterized all her previous responses, but now Tyler detected something underneath that made him instinctively want to step backward. "I understand exactly how things work here," Chloe said quietly, her words precise and deliberate. "I also understand that there are different ways of being part of a community, and some of those ways don't require joining specific social groups or accepting guidance from people I don't know well enough to trust." The statement hit Tyler like a physical impact, though he couldn't immediately identify why her words felt so threatening. She hadn't raised her voice, used insulting language, or made any overtly hostile gestures. Yet somehow she'd managed to communicate complete rejection of his authority while questioning his motives and trustworthiness in ways that left him without clear grounds for retaliation. Jake and Alex exchanged glances that Tyler caught in his peripheral vision, their expressions reflecting confusion and uncertainty, about how to proceed when their carefully rehearsed approach had been so thoroughly neutralized. The silence that followed Chloe's response stretched uncomfortably as Tyler struggled to formulate a reply that would re-establish his dominance without appearing obviously aggressive or defensive. "I think you'll find that attitude doesn't work very well at Westfield," Tyler finally managed, his voice tighter than he intended. "Students who try to stay above the community tend to discover that isolation has consequences they didn't anticipate." The threat was more direct than Tyler typically allowed himself in initial encounters, but Chloe's imperviousness to subtle manipulation had forced him into territory where plausible deniability became more difficult to maintain. He immediately regretted the escalation, recognizing that he'd revealed more about his intentions than strategic advantage allowed. Chloe's response was a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes and somehow managed to convey both amusement and warning. "I appreciate your concern," she said, returning to her sculpture work with movements that dismissed their presence as completely as words could have. "I'm sure everything will work out fine." Tyler found himself standing in the art studio with his closest allies, having been thoroughly defeated in a social interaction by someone who appeared to be doing nothing more than politely declining unwanted attention. The experience was so far outside his previous encounters that he had no framework for understanding what had occurred or how to respond appropriately. The walk back to Tyler's car was conducted in silence. That spoke volumes about the unprecedented nature of what they'd just witnessed. Jake broke the silence first, his usual confidence shaken by observing Tyler's authority challenged so effectively by someone who seemed completely unimpressed by the social capital they'd spent years accumulating. "What the hell was that about?" Jake asked, his voice reflecting genuine confusion rather than rhetorical frustration. "I've never seen anyone just brush you off like that. It was like she didn't even understand what you were offering her." Alex's analytical mind was already working to process the encounter and extract useful information about their unexpected opposition. "She understood perfectly," he said thoughtfully. "That's what made it so unsettling. She knew exactly what Tyler was doing and just chose not to engage with it. That suggests either remarkable confidence or some kind of experience with this type of situation that we haven't accounted for." Tyler remained silent during this analysis, his mind racing through implications and possibilities that threatened the fundamental assumptions underlying his entire approach to social control at Westfield Academy. If Chloe Anderson could resist his influence so completely, what did that suggest about the voluntary nature of other students' compliance? How many of his supposed allies were actually choosing cooperation rather than being manipulated into submission? The questions were dangerous because they suggested that Tyler's power might be more fragile than he'd believed, dependent on students' willingness to accept his authority rather than genuine inability to resist his methods. Chloe's behavior had demonstrated that resistance was possible, potentially inspiring others to question relationships they'd previously accepted as inevitable. That evening, Tyler called an emergency strategy session at his family's mansion, gathering Jake and Alex in his bedroom, where they could speak freely without adult supervision or potential eavesdropping. The room's displays of academic and athletic achievements felt different now, less like evidence of his capabilities and more like reassurance he suddenly needed about his own worth and effectiveness. "She's going to be a problem," Tyler announced, without preamble, his voice carrying conviction that masked the uncertainty Chloe's rejection had created. "Someone who can dismiss us that easily isn't going to limit herself to staying out of our way. Eventually she's going to challenge us more directly, and when that happens, other students are going to notice." Jake nodded agreement, his loyalty to Tyler overriding any doubts he might have about the necessity of targeting someone who had simply declined their invitation. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked, the question carrying implications about escalation that would have serious consequences for everyone involved. Tyler looked out his bedroom window at the lights of Millbrook spread below, the view reinforcing his sense of position and authority while he considered options that would re-establish his dominance without creating risks he couldn't control. Chloe Anderson had made a choice that challenged everything Tyler believed about social dynamics and personal power. Now he would have to make choices that would determine whether her resistance represented an isolated incident or the beginning of a revolution that could destroy everything he'd built. "We're going to teach her how things really work at Westfield Academy," Tyler said finally, his voice carrying quiet determination that promised consequences Chloe couldn't imagine. "And we're going to make sure every other student understands what happens when someone thinks they're too good for the community that's trying to welcome them." The decision transformed what might have remained a minor social friction into open warfare with stakes that extended far beyond typical teenage conflicts. Tyler had chosen escalation over acceptance, control over coexistence, and in making that choice, he'd set in motion events that would reveal capabilities and consequences that none of them were prepared to handle. The morning after Tyler's declaration of war against Chloe Anderson, Westfield Academy's social ecosystem began shifting in ways so subtle that most students attributed the changes to natural teenage drama, rather than recognizing the orchestrated campaign unfolding around them. Tyler had spent the previous evening with Jake and Alex planning a multi-phase assault designed to systematically isolate Chloe while maintaining plausible deniability that would protect them from administrative consequences. Phase 1 began during the first period when Alex Rodriguez utilized his position as a National Honor Society member to plant strategic information with carefully selected students. His approach was masterfully indirect. Instead of spreading obvious lies about Chloe, he shared concerns about her artistic methods and materials usage that painted her as wasteful and potentially dangerous in the studio environment. "I was talking to Miss Cooper yesterday about safety protocols," Alex mentioned casually to Sarah Chun, the NHS secretary who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of school gossip networks. "Apparently some students have been using expensive bronze materials for personal projects instead of following the curriculum guidelines. It's creating budget issues that might affect everyone's access to advanced equipment." The comment was carefully crafted to avoid naming Chloe directly while providing enough details for Sarah to identify her as the obvious culprit. Alex knew that Sarah would share this information with her extensive social network, adding her own interpretations and embellishments that would transform his concern about budget violations into speculation about entitled behavior and disregard for community resources. By lunch period, Alex's strategic seeding had grown into a comprehensive narrative about Chloe's artistic work. Students were discussing how the new girl from Oregon was hoarding expensive materials, taking up equipment time that belonged to students who had earned access through years of dedication, and receiving special treatment from Ms. Cooper that violated fairness principles other students respected. The story gained credibility because it contained elements of truth. Chloe did work with bronze. She did receive individual instruction, and her projects were more sophisticated than typical student work. Jake Morrison's contribution to the campaign operated through different channels, but proved equally effective. His popularity among athletes and his family's prominence in local business circles gave him access to students and parents who might not be influenced by academic gossip, but were sensitive to questions about character and social responsibility. During lacrosse practice, Jake began expressing puzzlement about Chloe's apparent lack of interest in school spirit and community involvement. "It's weird how some people transfer here and just expect everything to revolve around them," Jake commented to his teammates while they stretched before practice. "Like that girl in Miss Cooper's art class who acts like she's too good to participate in normal school activities. I tried to include her in study groups, but she basically said she was better off working alone." The lacrosse team's social influence extended beyond athletics into academic and social spheres, as team members were drawn from various social circles and economic backgrounds, united by shared competitive experiences and Tyler's leadership. Jake's casual observations about Chloe's antisocial tendencies spread through their networks with modifications that emphasized her supposed arrogance and rejection of community values that Westfield students prized. Tyler's personal contribution to the campaign was the most sophisticated, utilizing his position as student body president to address Chloe's behavior through official channels that carried institutional authority. He scheduled a meeting with Principal Harrison to discuss concerns about student integration and community building that had been brought to his attention by constituents worried about social cohesion. "I've been hearing from several students about challenges integrating a new transfer student who seems resistant to participating in school culture," Tyler explained to Principal Harrison with the earnest concern that had made him effective in student government. "I'm worried that if we don't address these early warning signs, we might see more serious social conflicts develop later in the semester." Tyler's genius lay in framing Chloe's independence as a potential threat to school harmony rather than presenting it as personal conflict requiring disciplinary intervention. By positioning himself as a concerned leader trying to prevent problems rather than someone creating them, he enlisted Principal Harrison as an unwitting ally in his campaign against Chloe's resistance to his authority. Principal Harrison appreciated Tyler's proactive approach to student concerns and agreed that early intervention might prevent minor social friction from escalating into more serious conflicts. He scheduled a guidance counselor meeting with Chloe to discuss her adjustment to Westfield's community culture and explore ways to help her feel more connected to school activities and social opportunities. The counseling session represented a masterstroke of Tyler's strategic thinking, as it created official documentation of Chloe's supposed adjustment problems while positioning school administration as concerned helpers rather than disciplinary authorities. When guidance counselor Mrs. Palmer called Chloe to her office for what was described as a routine check-in about her transition to Westfield, the meeting carried implications about behavioral concerns that had been reported by other students. Mrs. Palmer was a well-intentioned woman in her 50s who genuinely cared about student welfare but lacked the training to recognize sophisticated manipulation campaigns disguised as community concern. Her conversation with Chloe followed standard protocols for addressing potential social integration issues, focusing on opportunities for involvement rather than investigating whether reported problems actually existed. "How are you finding the social adjustment to Westfield?" Mrs. Palmer asked, her tone warm but carrying underlying assumptions about difficulties that needed addressing. "I know transferring during junior year can be challenging, especially to a close-knit community like ours where students have long established relationships." Chloe recognized immediately that the meeting wasn't routine, but had been triggered by external concerns that someone had brought to administrative attention. Her martial arts training had taught her to analyze situations carefully before responding, looking for underlying currents and hidden agendas that might not be immediately apparent. The timing of this counseling session, coming just days after her rejection of Tyler's social invitation, suggested connections that confirmed her growing understanding of the forces arrayed against her. "My adjustment has been going well," Chloe replied carefully, recognizing that her response would be documented and potentially shared with whoever had initiated concerns about her behavior. "I'm finding my classes challenging and interesting, and I'm developing my artistic skills through Ms. Cooper's excellent instruction." Mrs. Palmer consulted notes that had obviously been prepared in advance of their meeting, suggesting that specific issues had been identified rather than this being a general wellness check. "I've heard wonderful things about your artistic abilities," she continued, "but I'm wondering if you might benefit from getting involved in other school activities that could help you build broader social connections. We have many clubs and organizations that welcome new members." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Mrs. Palmer suggesting various extracurricular activities and social opportunities, while Chloe provided polite but non-committal responses that avoided making commitments she had no intention of keeping. The session concluded with Mrs. Palmer's recommendation that Chloe consider joining at least one group activity to demonstrate her commitment to being part of the Westfield community. The counseling meeting achieved Tyler's objectives perfectly. It created official concern about Chloe's social integration, while establishing expectations for behavior changes that would bring her under institutional pressure to participate in activities where Tyler's influence could be more directly applied. If Chloe continued to resist involvement, her behavior could be characterized as deliberately antisocial rather than simply independent. Phase 2 of Tyler's campaign began the following week when Jake Morrison organized a spontaneous lunch period discussion in the cafeteria about artistic integrity and fair resource allocation in school programs. The conversation was carefully staged to occur near Chloe's usual seating area, ensuring she would overhear comments designed to undermine her confidence and social standing. "I think it's great when students are passionate about their art," Jake said to a mixed group of athletes and academic achievers, his voice carrying just enough volume to be audible beyond their immediate circle. "But I also think there's something to be said for following established protocols and respecting the time other students have put into earning access to advanced resources." Emma Walsh, a senior who served as president of the drama club and possessed natural theatrical instincts that Jake had recruited for this performance, picked up the thread with practiced spontaneity. "Absolutely," she agreed, her voice carrying moral conviction that suggested genuine principles rather than coordinated manipulation. "It seems unfair when someone transfers in and immediately gets special treatment that students who've been here for years haven't received." The conversation continued with carefully scripted contributions from other students who had been briefed about their roles in advancing specific talking points. Topics included resource allocation, teacher favoritism, community responsibility, and the importance of earning recognition through demonstrated commitment rather than expecting immediate acceptance. Every comment was designed to be audible to Chloe while avoiding direct confrontation that might trigger disciplinary intervention. Alex Rodriguez contributed to this phase through academic channels, utilizing his connections with teachers and advanced placement students to raise questions about grading standards and project requirements that might be inconsistently applied. His approach was characteristically intellectual, focusing on fairness principles and educational policy rather than personal attacks that could be easily dismissed or reported. "I've been noticing some interesting variations in how art projects are evaluated," Alex mentioned during an academic decathlon team meeting, his tone suggesting scholarly observation rather than personal grievance. "It seems like some students are receiving recognition for work that might not meet the same standards applied to others. I'm wondering if we should discuss evaluation criteria with the faculty to ensure consistency." These academic discussions served multiple purposes in Tyler's overall strategy. They positioned Chloe's artistic achievements as potentially illegitimate while raising questions about Ms. Cooper's judgment and fairness that could undermine the teacher-student relationship that provided Chloe's primary source of institutional support. If Ms. Cooper began questioning her own evaluation methods or feeling defensive about her teaching practices, Chloe would lose the protective relationship that had helped her maintain confidence and focus. The psychological pressure campaign intensified when Tyler began utilizing social media platforms to amplify concerns about community values and student responsibility without directly naming Chloe or making accusations that could be traced back to him. His posts on Instagram and Snapchat focused on abstract principles about teamwork, mutual support, and the importance of contributing to school culture in ways that promoted collective success rather than individual achievement. Real leadership means lifting up the entire community, not just focusing on personal goals. Tyler posted on his Instagram story, accompanied by photos from recent lacrosse victories and student government activities that reinforced his image as someone who embodied collaborative values. Westfield succeeds when everyone contributes their talents to something bigger than themselves. The posts gained traction among students who admired Tyler's leadership and wanted to align themselves with his stated values, creating a social media echo chamber that reinforced messages about community responsibility while indirectly criticizing students who seemed to prioritize individual achievement over collective participation. Students began sharing and commenting on these posts with their own observations about the importance of school spirit and mutual support. Unknowingly participating in Tyler's campaign against Chloe's independence, Jake and Alex contributed complimentary social media content that expanded the narrative while maintaining plausible deniability about their coordination. Jake's posts focused on team success and the sacrifices individual athletes made for collective achievement, while Alex shared content about academic collaboration and the importance of peer support in achieving educational excellence. Together, their social media presence created a comprehensive message about community values that implicitly criticize anyone who seemed to reject opportunities for group participation. The campaign's effectiveness became apparent when students who had previously been neutral or friendly toward Chloe began displaying subtle signs of suspicion and social distance. Conversations grew quieter when she approached. Invitations to study groups became less frequent, and the general atmosphere around her shifted from welcoming curiosity to cautious evaluation. Students were processing information about her character and behavior through filters created by Tyler's systematic information campaign, leading them to interpret her independence as arrogance and her focus as antisocial behavior. Ms. Cooper noticed the changing dynamics during art class periods when collaborative projects revealed social tensions that hadn't existed earlier in the semester. Students who had previously been eager to work with Chloe on mixed media experiments began choosing other partners, citing scheduling conflicts or preferences for different artistic approaches. The social isolation was subtle enough to avoid appearing like obvious exclusion, but comprehensive enough to make Chloe's classroom experience significantly more difficult and uncomfortable. The situation escalated when several parents contacted the school administration with questions about resource allocation and teacher supervision that clearly reflected concerns planted by Tyler's network. These parents had legitimate standing to raise questions about educational policies and student welfare, providing cover for inquiries that might otherwise be dismissed as inappropriate interference in classroom management. Mrs. Chun, Tyler's mother and school board member, mentioned during a board meeting that she'd received several parent communications about ensuring equitable access to advanced artistic materials and instruction. Her comments carried special weight because of her position and family's prominence in the community, while her careful wording avoided direct accusations that could be challenged or investigated. "We want to make sure all students have fair opportunities to develop their talents," Mrs. Chun explained to her fellow board members, "and that our teachers are applying consistent standards that recognize effort and dedication rather than showing favoritism based on factors unrelated to educational merit." The board discussion that followed created additional institutional pressure on Ms. Cooper to justify her teaching methods and evaluation criteria, making her more cautious about providing individual attention or advanced opportunities that might be perceived as unfair to other students. This institutional pressure achieved Tyler's objective of undermining the teacher-student relationship that had provided Chloe with support and recognition that threatened his social dominance. By the end of November, Tyler's campaign had successfully transformed Chloe from a respected newcomer with promising artistic abilities into a controversial figure whose presence at Westfield generated ongoing discussions about community values, fairness, and appropriate behavior. The transformation had been achieved through systematic manipulation of information, social dynamics, and institutional processes that operated below the threshold of obvious harassment, while creating comprehensive pressure designed to force Chloe into submission or departure. The campaign's sophistication lay in its multi-layered approach that addressed different audiences through appropriate channels while maintaining consistency in overall messaging about community responsibility and collective values. Students received social pressure through gossip networks and peer influence. Teachers faced institutional questions about fairness and consistency, and administrators dealt with parent concerns about educational policies and resource management. Chloe found herself navigating an increasingly hostile environment, where her every action was scrutinized for evidence of the antisocial tendencies that had been attributed to her character. Simple choices like eating lunch alone or staying after school to work on art projects were interpreted through frameworks that confirmed pre-existing assumptions about her arrogance and lack of community spirit. The psychological pressure was relentless and expertly applied, designed to make her question her own perceptions, while gradually eroding the confidence and independence that had initially protected her from Tyler's influence. What Tyler didn't realize was that Chloe's martial arts training had prepared her for exactly this type of systematic psychological warfare, teaching her to maintain center and clarity regardless of external pressures, while carefully observing her opponent's methods and weaknesses. Master Williams had taught her that the most dangerous fights were those where physical confrontation was delayed, while psychological pressure built to breaking points that forced hasty decisions and tactical errors. Chloe was beginning to understand that Tyler's campaign represented a sophisticated form of combat that required different strategies than direct physical confrontation, but followed many of the same principles about patience, timing, and understanding your opponent's true capabilities. The question was whether Tyler understood that his systematic harassment had finally encountered someone trained to recognize psychological warfare for what it was, and prepared to respond with methods he had never encountered before. Tuesday afternoon arrived with the kind of gray December weather that made indoor spaces feel isolated from the outside world. Chloe was alone in the art studio, working on final touches to her portfolio pieces while surrounded by construction materials and dust covers that transformed the familiar creative sanctuary into something resembling a warehouse. The building's emptiness created an atmosphere of anticipation that reminded her uncomfortably of the moments before sparring matches when opponents circled each other looking for opening attacks. She'd been expecting this confrontation for weeks, recognizing that Tyler's psychological campaign would eventually require escalation when subtle methods failed to achieve their objectives. Her martial arts training had taught her to read the progression of conflicts, understanding how frustration and failed strategies often led to desperate actions that revealed opponents' true capabilities and intentions. Master Williams had spent considerable time teaching her about the moment when psychological warfare transitions into physical confrontation, explaining that recognizing this shift was crucial for maintaining strategic advantage while avoiding unnecessary harm to all parties involved. The most dangerous moment in any conflict, he'd told her, is when your opponent realizes their preferred methods aren't working and decides to try something they're less skilled at using. Chloe heard footsteps in the hallway outside the studio and felt her breathing naturally shift into the controlled rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times during meditation and forms training. Her hands remained steady as she continued working on bronze details, but her awareness expanded to encompass potential threats, escape routes, and makeshift weapons available in the cluttered studio environment. Tyler entered first, followed by Jake and Alex in the same formation they'd used during their initial recruitment attempt 3 months earlier. The difference was immediately apparent in their body language and energy, where their previous approach had been diplomatic manipulation. This encounter carried an unmistakable threat that even untrained observers would recognize as dangerous. "Working late again, Chloe," Tyler said, his voice lacking any pretense of friendliness or reasonable discourse. "Very dedicated." very focused on your individual achievements, while ignoring everything else about being part of a community. Chloe set down her tools and turned to face them, her posture relaxed but centered in ways that allowed instant movement in any direction her training might require. She'd learned to appear calm and unthreatening while maintaining tactical readiness that could respond to aggression with devastating efficiency when circumstances demanded it. "Tyler," she acknowledged simply, her tone carrying neither fear nor hostility, but rather the kind of professional attention she'd learned to apply when facing serious opponents. "Jake, Alex, I wasn't expecting visitors during construction hours." Tyler moved closer to her workspace, his eyes scanning the portfolio pieces she'd been preparing for exhibition review. The bronze sculptures caught late afternoon light streaming through dust-covered windows, their graceful forms suggesting both artistic sophistication and technical mastery that even Tyler's prejudices couldn't entirely dismiss. "Impressive work," Tyler said, though his tone suggested that he found her achievements personally offensive rather than admirable. "All this individual effort and artistic vision, very inspiring. Too bad it's going to be wasted when the exhibition committee realizes they're looking at work from someone who refuses to be part of the school community that made it possible." The threat was barely coded now, and Chloe recognized that Tyler had moved beyond psychological manipulation into territory where he intended to use direct action to achieve objectives that subtle methods had failed to accomplish. Her training had prepared her for exactly this moment when conflict became unavoidable and defensive. Action became necessary to protect both herself and her work. "Miss Cooper provided excellent instruction," Chloe replied evenly, maintaining a conversational tone while tracking the positions and movements of all three boys. "I'm grateful for the opportunities Westfield Academy has offered, and I hope my work reflects well on the school's artistic program." Jake laughed harshly, the sound carrying frustration that had been building for months as their sophisticated campaign failed to achieve its intended psychological impact. "Still playing innocent, aren't you?" he said, moving to position himself between Chloe and the studio's main exit. "Still pretending you don't understand what your attitude has cost this school's community spirit." Alex remained near the doorway, but shifted to block the secondary exit that led to the equipment storage area, completing an encirclement that was clearly planned and practiced. "You had chances to be part of something bigger than yourself," he added, his analytical nature evident in how he justified their actions through logical frameworks. "Every opportunity we offered was rejected because you thought you were better than everyone else here." Tyler reached toward one of Chloe's bronze sculptures, his intention obvious though he hadn't yet made contact with her work. "These pieces represent months of effort using school resources and teacher instruction that other students helped fund through their participation in community activities you couldn't be bothered to join," he said, his voice carrying a moral conviction that justified whatever destruction he was planning. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you," Chloe said quietly, her tone remaining conversational despite the clear warning in her words. For the first time since the confrontation began, she allowed some of her underlying capabilities to show through in ways that changed the entire dynamic of their encounter. Tyler's hand paused inches from the sculpture as something in Chloe's voice triggered instinctive wariness that his conscious mind hadn't yet processed. Jake and Alex shifted their positions slightly, their body language reflecting uncertainty about what they'd heard in her tone that suggested hidden resources they hadn't anticipated. "Are you threatening us?" Tyler asked, though his question carried less confidence than his previous statements. For the first time in months of psychological warfare, he was beginning to suspect that he might have miscalculated something fundamental about his opponent's capabilities. "I'm sharing information," Chloe replied, rising from her work stool with fluid grace that suggested athletic training far beyond typical high school fitness levels. "Touching someone else's property without permission isn't appropriate." I'd hate for anyone to get hurt because they made poor decisions based on incomplete understanding of the situation. The transformation in Chloe's presence was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone with experience reading human behavior and physical capability. What had appeared to be calm composure now revealed itself as controlled readiness that could explode into action faster than untrained opponents could process or respond to. Effectively, Tyler's pride and months of frustration overrode his growing wariness as he completed his reach toward the bronze sculpture, intending to demonstrate his power by destroying work that represented everything about Chloe's independence that he found threatening. His fingers had barely made contact with the metal surface when Chloe moved with speed and precision that transformed the studio's atmosphere from tense confrontation into something approaching combat. The paint bucket sat on a nearby table, half filled with crimson acrylic left over from a previous student's project. Tyler's desperate attempt to humiliate Chloe by dumping it over her head represented the culmination of months of failed psychological warfare and the beginning of his education about the difference between perceived power and actual capability. Moment Tyler lifted the paint bucket and began his swing toward Chloe's head. 3 months of sophisticated psychological warfare collided with 8 years of disciplined martial arts training in ways that none of the boys could have anticipated or prepared for. What Tyler intended as the ultimate humiliation became instead a demonstration of capabilities that transformed him from predator to cautionary tale in less time than it takes to complete a heartbeat. Chloe's response was fluid motion that seemed to flow around Tyler's attack rather than meeting it with opposing force. Her left hand guided the paint bucket's trajectory past her head, while her right palm struck Tyler's solar plexus with precisely controlled pressure that emptied his lungs and sent him stumbling backward into Jake Morrison, who had been moving forward to provide support that became collision instead of assistance. The crimson paint that should have humiliated Chloe splashed harmlessly across the studio floor as Tyler discovered that months of psychological manipulation had not prepared him for an opponent who understood combat at levels he'd never imagined. His gasping attempts to breathe provided a soundtrack for Jake's panicked attempts to untangle himself from Tyler's falling body while processing what he'd just witnessed. Alex Rodriguez remained frozen near the doorway, his analytical mind struggling to reconcile 3 months of intelligence gathering that had completely failed to identify Chloe's martial arts background with the devastating efficiency he was observing in real time. Every assumption their campaign had been based on that Chloe was an isolated newcomer without significant defensive capabilities, was being systematically destroyed by someone who moved like water and struck like lightning. That was poorly planned, Chloe observed conversationally, maintaining a ready stance while Tyler struggled to regain normal breathing patterns. Her tone carried the same calm professionalism she'd demonstrated throughout their psychological campaign, but now it was accompanied by a physical presence that redefined every aspect of their previous interactions. Jake attempted to charge while Tyler was still recovering, his athletic training providing confidence that proved entirely misplaced when confronting someone whose movement education went far beyond high school sports preparation. Chloe's pivot and arm sweep sent him sliding across the paint-slicked floor into a stack of canvases that cushioned his impact while ensuring he remained too disoriented to continue immediate aggression. "This doesn't have to escalate further," Chloe continued, addressing all 3 boys while maintaining visual tracking that ensured no one could approach her blind spot without triggering defensive responses they were completely unprepared to handle. Poor decisions can still be corrected if people are willing to acknowledge mistakes and change their behavior accordingly. Tyler finally managed to draw breath sufficient for speech, though his voice carried a wheeze that undermined any attempt at maintaining authoritative presence. You can't. This doesn't change anything," he gasped, his worldview still struggling to process how completely his power dynamics had been reversed. "Everyone still knows what you really are." What I really am, Chloe replied gently, is someone who tried very hard to avoid this exact situation by maintaining a low profile and not engaging with provocations that were clearly designed to create conflict. You made choices that forced physical confrontation when psychological methods failed to achieve your objectives. Alex finally found his voice, though his question reflected genuine bewilderment rather than strategic thinking. How ... Where did you learn to move like that? He asked, his academic curiosity temporarily overriding awareness that he was potentially next in line for educational experiences he wasn't equipped to handle. 8 years of traditional martial arts training under Master Williams in Portland, Chloe answered matter-of-factly. Daily practice since I was 9 years old, with emphasis on mental discipline, conflict avoidance, and precise response when avoidance becomes impossible. Everything your intelligence gathering somehow missed during 3 months of systematic research. The revelation hit Alex like a physical impact as he realized that their comprehensive campaign had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of their target's capabilities and background. Tyler's sophisticated psychological warfare had been deployed against someone whose training specifically prepared her for exactly that type of systematic pressure, while their escalation to physical confrontation had engaged someone whose defensive skills operated at professional levels. Jake struggled to a standing position, paint-covered and thoroughly disoriented, but still clinging to familiar aggressive patterns that had served him well in typical teenage conflicts. 3 against 1. He muttered, though his tone suggested more hope than confidence. We can still handle this. Mathematics works differently when training and preparation are factored into calculations, Chloe observed, shifting slightly to maintain optimal positioning relative to all 3 potential opponents. Master Williams taught me that the most important variable in any conflict is understanding, both of yourself and your opposition. Your months of psychological pressure demonstrated that you understand manipulation, but not genuine strength. Tyler was beginning to comprehend that his systematic campaign had not only failed to break Chloe's resistance, but had actually been operating against someone who possessed resources and capabilities that made his methods appear amateur by comparison. The realization was devastating, not just tactically but philosophically, undermining beliefs about power and control that had shaped his entire approach to social relationships. People believe what they observe, Chloe interrupted gently. 3 months of psychological pressure failed to change my behavior, academic performance, or artistic achievement. Now 3 of Westfield Academy's most prominent students have been easily handled by someone who has been trying very hard not to hurt anyone, despite systematic harassment and eventual physical attack. The truth of her observations settled over the paint-splattered studio like revelation. Students who heard about this incident would understand that Tyler's months of sophisticated manipulation had been defeated by someone who possessed genuine capabilities rather than manufactured authority. The power dynamic that had seemed absolute was revealed as artificial construction that collapsed when tested against authentic strength and preparation. Marcus Thompson's voice echoed from the hallway outside the studio, calling Chloe's name. As he approached for their agreed meeting about college application strategies, his timing was perfect, providing witness to the aftermath while ensuring that Tyler, Jake, and Alex couldn't revise the narrative of what had occurred to protect their reputations. In here, Marcus, Chloe called, her tone casual despite the combat-ready posture she maintained while watching 3 boys process a new understanding of their situation. We're just finishing a conversation about community dynamics and conflict resolution. Marcus entered the studio and immediately assessed the scene with journalistic instincts that recognized significant story potential. Tyler Chun was paint-splattered and struggling with breathing difficulties. Jake Morrison was covered in crimson acrylic and surrounded by scattered canvases. Alex Rodriguez stood frozen with expression, suggesting fundamental worldview adjustment. And Chloe Anderson remained centered and composed, despite obvious signs of recent confrontation. Interesting conversation, Marcus observed, his camera phone already documenting evidence that would become legendary within Westfield Academy's social ecosystem. Mind if I ask how it concluded? Tyler realized that attempting to control the narrative of this incident would be impossible when faced with photographic evidence and witness testimony that contradicted any story he might construct. His sophisticated methods for managing information and reputation were useless when confronted with obvious facts that no amount of manipulation could explain away. "I think we're finished here," Tyler said finally, his voice carrying defeat that marked the end of his reign as Westfield Academy's unofficial social controller. The authority he'd built through psychological manipulation had been destroyed by someone who possessed authentic capabilities and genuine strength that couldn't be undermined through gossip or institutional pressure. Jake and Alex followed Tyler's lead in retreating from the studio, their departure marking the conclusion of a campaign that had lasted 3 months and ultimately served to demonstrate the difference between manufactured power and earned capability. The hallway conversations that would follow this incident would reshape Westfield Academy's social dynamics in ways that favored authenticity over manipulation. Chloe watched them leave before turning to Marcus with a slight smile that reflected satisfaction at conflict successfully resolved without unnecessary harm to anyone involved. "I should probably clean up this paint before it stains the floor permanently," she said, as if discussing routine maintenance rather than the aftermath of psychological warfare and physical confrontation. "The Regional Exhibition Committee is going to love your portfolio," Marcus replied, his camera capturing images of bronze sculptures that remained undamaged despite Tyler's destructive intentions. "And I suspect the story of how you handled Westfield Academy's biggest bullying problem is going to inspire a lot of students who thought they had no choice but to accept harassment and manipulation." The transformation of Westfield Academy's social landscape began immediately, as news of Tyler's defeat spread through student networks faster than any carefully planted rumor campaign could have achieved. Students who had endured months or years of Tyler's psychological control discovered that resistance was possible when confronted with authentic strength and proper preparation. Chloe Anderson's example inspired others to develop genuine capabilities rather than seeking artificial authority, while Tyler Chun's comprehensive defeat served as demonstration that sophisticated manipulation was ultimately powerless against someone who possessed real skills and unshakable character. The paint bucket incident became legend. But the deeper lesson about the difference between perceived power and actual strength changed everything about how students at Westfield Academy understood courage, preparation, and the choice to stand up for themselves when standing up became necessary. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.